This is a little talk on why I believe retail industry or businesses, and more broadly speaking, things like, say, the housing market, are ultimately, in most of the Western world, doomed to some kind of cataclysmic collapse or reset or default, whatever word you want to put in there for the end of the world as we know it in terms of basic day-to-day commerce in retail goods. And the primary reason for that is that once you get beyond, say, groceries and gasoline, some very basic nature, stuff that you're going to pay day to day out of your paycheck. When you're talking about big purchases, when you're talking about furniture, when you're talking about bedding, when you're talking about cars and homes and things of that nature, when you break down the sales data, almost exclusively these things are being sold via debt. They're not being bought out of individuals' savings. They're not the kind of thing that people are going to be able to, the average person anyway, is going to be able to afford out of their savings. Because, just take your pick of any of the recent articles out there on the internet that say the average individual isn't prepared for a $500 emergency expense. Like, your car breaks down and it needs some new part, and there's probably half a dozen things in your car that can break down at any moment that are $500 plus to repair. If you're owning a vehicle, which is, a requirement for employment in about 85% of America, a big chunk of Western Europe too, probably. If you need to go to the emergency room, even if you've got insurance, you're probably going to have to kick out some money for being seen in an emergency capacity, even if it's for something stupid like, one of their kids fell or something of that nature. So if they don't have $500 on hand for an emergency purchase, that also means that they don't have that money on hand for retail purchases of any kind, of that scale or higher. And debt is the only way that they would be able to take those out. So that's either business loans, personal loans, car loans, mortgages, or your good old-fashioned credit card. And if you pay any attention to TV, which I don't really suggest, but if you do pay any attention to television, it's almost always 0% this, 0% that, and low financing rates, and an obscene number of months or years that they will extend those payments out to give them the illusion of affordability, to let people pretend that they're wealthy and let the economy pretend that they are viable. That, this person can service this debt. And that's the only way we know right now in most of the developed world to increase consumption is by increasing debt. And we've hit that button so many times. We hit that button in 2000 after the dot-com crash. We hit that button after the 2008 housing market crash. Even now, central banks print huge amounts of money. It's called quantitative easing. And they buy everything. They buy houses, they buy debt securities, they buy bonds, they buy government bonds, they buy personal corporate bonds. They buy the stock market. Is getting to the point where in a lot of places, the central bank, with freshly printed unlimited infinity amount dollars, is becoming the largest buyer of everything when it comes to financial type of dealings. That the only people that can afford to buy are people with printing presses that can summon an infinite amount of money at any given time. And so that is why if you're working in a Best Buy, or you're working in a Target or a Walmart or a furniture store or a mattress store, you're working at any one of these places, and if you're living this life day to day, you're wondering, is it me? Am I doing something wrong? Or is it just that nobody is coming in the door? And the people that do come in the door are either so poor that they don't have any money available, that they're having to buy the cheapest thing, that the average ticket is going down. Or even if you convince them, hey, let's look at this higher end product, let's look at this $5,000 item that you could easily replace with a $500 item and get 80 or 90% of the value in terms of its utility from the $500 item. Let's look at this $5,000 luxury brand instead as a status symbol. And let's say you do all of your pro salesman stuff. It's not going to help if the credit doesn't go through. If they can't debt finance that purchase about 80 or 90% of the time, they're not going to be able to make that purchase at all. And so these financial institutions, these big banks, these credit card companies, the central banks, are put into the situation where they have to decide, are we going to let the economy contract? Are we going to allow ourselves to go into this next depression, recession, stock market crash, whatever you want to say? Are we going to go on that natural trajectory if we were to go solely on people's funding and real interest rates and things of that nature? Or are we going to extend and pretend? Are we going to give more debt to more people that have no business having that debt? Are we going to make house loans to people who can't afford it? Are we going to make car loans to people who don't have an income that justifies the size of car loan or the term of the car loan that they offer? Are we going to extend consumer credit to people that are bad risks? Because if you don't extend that credit, you set yourself up for an immediate crash. A decline in sales, depression, recession, that's what's facing you if debt does not increase. If you do, on the other hand, offer that debt to people out there, and they do make the purchases of shit they don't really need. You know, it's one thing if you are buying an asset that you're using to actually make yourself money in the long term. You know, if you buy a used car, a cheap, affordable car, and you drive to a job, that's how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to extend your ability to earn when you buy something. If all you're doing is consuming, and you're using debt to consume, and this debt is being offered to people who can't back it up, or at least in large part can't back it up, or they're so on the razor's edge, one little bump, one little other thing, something else that takes priority. I mean, what are you going to pay first? Are you going to keep the doctors happy and pay some medical bills if something were to happen? Or are you going to send that monthly installment payment to the furniture company for your wardrobe, or your fancy mattress, or your adjustable base, or your 60-inch flat screen TV? Who in that situation are you going to keep more happy? Are you going to keep making your car payment so you can get to work every day? Or are you going to pay on some other little bullshit? So obviously there's a ranking here. There's a hierarchy of who gets paid first if something happens. And that's if people get paid at all. Some people just throw their hands up and they say, I can't do it anymore. There's people who put the keys in the mail to their house because their house has gone down so much in value that it doesn't make sense for them to keep making payments. They'll pay 3 or 4 times the value of the house. So that, in a nutshell, is why the retail economy is doomed one way or the other. Either they extend this credit knowing that people can't afford to make these purchases in the long run. They have to sell these luxury goods that are excessively priced with debt, because nobody can really afford it otherwise. Or they have to take their medicine right now, and that would mean store closings. I mean, we're already seeing store closings. Google store closings this year, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So we're damned if we do and damned if we don't when it comes to extending credit and debt. And we're going to see it in retail. We're going to see it on Main Street. We're going to see it in the shopping centers that everybody peruses. You're probably not going to be isolated unless you're in some of these really hot spots where wealth really concentrates, where really upper class people congregate that just have ridiculous amounts of money from, Silicon Valley, South Beach kind of places where ridiculous amount of money your one percenters kind of gather. If you're in Everytown, USA, if you're in Small Town, USA, if you, aren't in one of these giant supercenters of rich elitists, you're going to see businesses close. You're going to see shops go out of business, restaurants go out of business. Because even Subway is closing stores. I mean, Subway, what's your average ticket at Subway? Do you spend $6 or $8 at Subway? It's like one of your lowest tier food cost purchases. Subway is having lower sales. So this is something to keep in mind just day to day to try to keep your sanity. Especially if you have to go out and work into these places and you're thinking, what am I going to do? Is it me? No, it's not you. If you show up and do your job and you're trying your best to work in the system, even if you're knowing something is wrong, I gotta feel that for every person who knows it's wrong, there's gotta be quite a few more who feel something is off, that something just isn't jiving right with what they're being told, the kind of hype that they get from the media, establishment media, and even their superiors, because, there's nobody or anything regulating that. If your boss is selling you a line of bullshit, there's no government agency to go to. There's no place you can really go and say, you know what, yeah, my boss said this, and guess what? It was a lie. He said I'd make this much doing sales in this area, doing this thing, and if I had tried hard enough, it would be completely taken care of. No. They can say that, and I don't see anything wrong with trying to keep morale up and hype up your crew, but at a certain point it just kind of backfires, because if you keep saying stuff that's so counterintuitive, that's so different from what people actually experience day to day, you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're going to lose all legitimacy. But they do it anyway because they hope they can get the stupid people to believe the hype, and keep their doors open one more day, one more week, one more month, and then if you can't take there's a fancy word for it, cognitive dissonance, that you constantly see one thing that's different from another, when you just can't take it anymore, they'll discard you. If you blow up, if you have an emotional episode, if you publicly contradict your superiors who are in this artificial paradigm, they don't care. They're desperate. They're, a couple notches up above the ladder from you in pay scale and lifestyle. And they might even be levered up worse than you. So in terms of stability, in terms of economic survivability, they can very easily be in a worse position than you if you're the guy making $8, $10, $12 an hour being a lackey in some kind of facility, but you've kept your costs under control. You know, if you're living in mom's basement, if you're not living the dream, if you're not driving a fancy car and living in a fancy apartment or a house, you literally could have more disposable income than your boss or your superiors. Yeah, they might look richer than you, but it's all owned by the bank. They're just pretending. They're renting that lifestyle. They're borrowing it. They don't own it. They aren't better than you. That's one of the hardest things in the society today, in this whole situation. It is a great mystery to find. It is hard to find a legitimate person. I mean, you can't just open up the books and say, oh, well, this person has their house paid off. They're wealthy. They have savings. They have investments. Across the street might be another guy. Same house, same car, better house, better car. You know, hot-looking wife. They go on vacation all the time. But they're in debt up to their eyeballs. They're just barely slinking by. And one little thing happens, and it could be over for them in an instant. So, this is just a message for people out there. Try to stay sane. Try to stay balanced. Look out for yourself. Protect yourself. Look out for your own self-interest. Don't count on anyone else to bail you out when it gets nasty, because if you do any kind of looking at the data, we owe a lot that we've tried to put off, and the further we put it off, the worse it's going to be. I've rambled on a little bit here, so I'm going to stop now, and I'll catch you on the next one.